So in the last two sessions, we have explored the consumer behavior using the cardinal analysis. And this session onwards, we shall try and understand the consumer behavior using the ordinal approach. So I hope you have liked the earlier sessions and you have shared it with your friends. And please do not forget to subscribe to this channel. I also hope that you found the text on the PowerPoint slides useful. I know that I have written more than what I normally write on a slide, but this is for you to use them as reference points. So let me move on to the slides. The first and foremost idea is to critique the cardinal analysis that we just studied. Why do we critique? We critique a theory mainly because there might be some shortcomings that could be understood once a theory has been used for explaining something. There might have been other developments that could have been identified. It is also possible that there is a need for refining that existing theory. So this cardinal analysis gave way or gave the rise to the indifference curve approach. So indifference curve approach, when we study, we also look into the shortcomings of the cardinal analysis, where we say the assumptions are very doubtful. We also say that individuals are not such calculating machines where they can measure the number of utils that they get after each consumption, and they can compare one util with the other. And then the consumer, the word itself, util, has got problems. So these were the kind of shortcomings or as a criticism of that. We also say that the marginal utility of money cannot be held constant because in real life, marginal utility of money also changes. Nevertheless, the cardinal analysis gave rise to an alternative approach, which we call as the ordinal analysis. So this indifference curve approach is associated with the name of Francis Edgeworth, 1881, and later by the Italian economist Vilfredo Pareto in 1906. But then after quite some time, we also find that the Russian economist statistician Eugene Slutsky developed it further and then further refined by R.J.D. Allen and J.R. Hicks in 1934 and 1939. So that's what we are using today. So what's this concept of indifference curve? Here we understand the consumer can identify baskets of goods and commodities that he wants to consume, which gives the consumer the same level of satisfaction. Now we shall see how do we explain the same level of satisfaction. Indifference curve itself is a heuristic device, which means it is an artificial construct, and it has been developed to explain this economic phenomena of consumer behavior. So look at this diagram. You can see how the consumer's indifference curve is drawn. We have a curve called the indifference curve, and it has got different combinations written on it, A, B, C, D, and E. And each of this combination has different number of units on the y-axis and the x-axis. And when we combine all these points of different combinations of goods on the y and x-axis, we get what is called as an indifference curve. And any point on the indifference curve is assumed to give the consumer the same level of satisfaction. To study the indifference curve approach, just like we had for cardinal approach, we also have assumptions here. And these assumptions are presented in the two books here, important books, Reconstruction of the Theory of Value, 1934, and Hicks Value and Capital, 1939. So the first assumption that we make here is utility is ordinal, which means we cannot exactly measure and tell how many utils or what is the utility that one consumer is getting when he or she consumes something, but we can say that the consumer prefers one to the other, or says that this is better than the other, because we are talking about first, second combination is better, or third combination is better. So a consumer can do that, but he cannot say exactly by how much he is better off by consuming combination A or combination B. So it is necessary that the consumer can understand he can understand the preference of these combination, but he does not necessarily measure the utility that he derives. The second one is known as the rationality assumption, and here the consumer is rational because the consumer wants to get the maximum satisfaction about the consumption that he has just undertaken with the prices known to him and the income that he has. So he is supposed to have full knowledge about the relevant information about these two commodities and the prices. So that is why it is also known as completeness of information for the consumer. And then we say that the total utility of this consumer depends upon the quantity of the commodities consumed. So what is the total amount of commodity consumed? That is what gives the consumer the total utility. Now, the other one is that of consistency and transitivity. Transitivity is relativity, or relating one combination to another combination. So your consumer is consistent with his choice, which means that if a consumer in a given period, if a consumer prefers combination A to combination B, and then B combination is preferred to C, then if the same commodities are available in another period, the consumer would accept the same order of A better than B and B better than C. The other one of transitivity says that if consumer has preferred A combination to B and B combination to C, then we would say that the consumer prefers A to C. So that is what we mean. We are relating it and telling that the consumer has preferred A combination to C. Now, this is something which is logically right. If we have said something is good, then we don't change the mind and say that something is, the second time we don't say something is better. We are assuming that the consumer will be consistent in this preferences that he is making. Then it is the diminishing marginal rate of substitution. Now, when we use this term marginal rate of substitution, we understand what is the number of units of commodity Y that the consumer is willing to give up to get additional units of commodity X. And this on this to be, and but yet he stays on the same indifference curve. So he's on the same indifference curve, giving up some units of commodity Y and taking more units of commodity X. So indifference curves are usually steeper on the left and flatter on the right. So we can see that in an indifference curve. Now, how do we explain the diminishing marginal rate of substitution? This table you are in some sense familiar when we had done the production possibility curve, something similar to that. So here we are talking about commodity combinations A, B, C, D, and E. And we have two sets of commodities, oranges replicating one kind of fruits and mangoes probably another. But anyway, we will take oranges and mangoes for the time being. So we say that combination A has got 14 mangoes and 14 oranges and just one mango. Combination B has got 9 oranges and just 2, and it goes down. The combination E has got just 3 oranges and 5 mangoes. Now, what we need to see in the last column is how much or how many units of commodity Y did the consumer substitute to get additional units of commodity X. Now, what you see in the table is that the commodity which was given up in the first time was 5 units for getting 1 additional unit of commodity X. The second time, the consumer was a little careful. He did not give 5. He gave only 3 units to get 1 additional unit. Then he gave only 2 units to get an additional unit. And the last time, he just gave up 1 unit of commodity Y to get 1 additional unit of commodity X. Now that is the same thing that has been put on the graph on the right side. You will find indifference curve has got quite a number of diagrams, and you will find it interesting that the ideas that we are talking about can be so easily converted into diagrams, and you too should be able to use the logic of the diagram and draw these diagrams on your own rather than by hearting them. Right? There is good logic in these diagrams. So you see these different combination 14 to 1 or 3 is to 5, all these points A, B, C, D and E are pointed on the graph, and then you can connect these points together. We have got a diminishing marginal rate of substitution. You can see that the vertical line is constantly diminishing as we go down, and on the horizontal addition, that is 1 unit and 1 unit and 1 unit, that remains the same. So that's called the diminishing marginal rate of substitution. So at the margin, how much are we substituting commodity Y for commodity X? Why does this happen? It is very simple to understand why this is happening. As more and more units of one commodity increases, then the satiety sets in, and the consumer does not want more and more of that commodity, because and these goods are not perfect substitutes of each other. So oranges are never the perfect mangoes are never the perfect substitutes of orange. So after some time, the consumer does not feel the need to exchange, and consumers always like variety. So he could have moved everything from the oranges to mangoes, but consumers also prefer variety. Therefore, he keeps a combination of both the goods. Now we come to an interesting part of this indifference curve analysis, where we understand the properties of indifference curve. Now these properties of indifferences can be explained in this way. The first one, we say that indifference curve has got a negative slope. If it is from this, we can understand, if the quantity of commodity X increases, it is obvious that on a given indifference curve, the given quantity of X cannot increase unless we have given up more and more units of Y. So that is one of the reasons. If you want the consumer to be on the same indifference curve, this has to happen. And the left hand of the indifference curve is relatively steep, and the right hand side is flatter. It cannot be, the indifference curve cannot be vertical, horizontal or upward sloping. We can see it in the next diagram. You can see this first panel. Now in this first panel, what has happened is the consumer has got OY and OX of two commodities, and it is now against the assumptions that we have made. You can see here the consumer is now moving to both increased units of commodity Y and commodity X, and therefore the consumer has got an upward sloping curve. That cannot happen to an indifference curve. That happens sometime later when we look into other effects. We can use that diagram. As of now, the consumer cannot get a diagram like this. Now, we also say that the consumer cannot keep the unit of Y constant with a given income that the prices and income that he has. He cannot keep the units of Y constant and only increase the units of commodity X. Therefore, it cannot be a horizontal line. And look at the third panel, the C panel. In that panel, what is happening is the consumer, the number of units of commodity X is kept constant, and the number of units of commodity Y is held constant. That is again not following the assumption of the diminishing marginal rate of substitution. So finally, there is only one way an indifference curve can be presented, that is sloping from left to right, like how we are seeing in the fourth panel. Then we say that the next property of the indifference curve is two indifference curves cannot intersect each other. So each indifference curve represents a particular level of satisfaction. So if the first indifference curve has got a particular level of satisfaction, then another indifference curve will have another level of satisfaction. So if the two curves have to intersect each other, then we can't explain the working of this indifference curve. And if they have a point of intersection, it would mean there is some contradiction in the argument itself of saying that higher indifference curve gives higher level of satisfaction. You see here in this diagram, the blue indifference curve and the red indifference curve. The blue indifference curve is IC2, which has got different points A, B, C, D on its curve, and the red one, IC1, also has got different points of combination of 1. Now, if these two curves are, one curve is showing a higher combination of a larger combination of two goods, then how do they become the same at point C? At point C, it assumes that the consumer is getting the same level of satisfaction on both indifference curve 1 and indifference curve 2. So this is logically incorrect, and therefore we don't understand this argument that the curves can intersect at all. It cannot intersect. When A is higher than B, then if A and B are at two levels, how can C be the same for both the curves? That's the logic there. So that is, here you can see higher indifference curve shows higher level of satisfaction. So if it is IC1 is lower level, it has got a combination of A, B, C, D, E, then indifference curve 2 will have another set of combination A1, B1, C1, D1 and E. And in that case, the combination number of goods that we are getting in indifference curve 1 it will be lower than the number of goods that are available on indifference curve 2. So more goods means more satisfaction. That is what one of the assumption we made. The total utility will be more when the consumer consumes more number of units of the goods. And another thing that the property we say is indifference curve cannot touch either of the two axes. Now, what does it mean if the indifference curve touches the axis Y? If the indifference curve touches axis Y, it means the consumer has got all of commodity Y and none of commodity X. Now, this is against the assumption we made that the consumer has got a basket of goods, and we explained it with the help of oranges and mangoes. In this particular example, it will mean the consumer has got only oranges and no mangoes at all. Or the alternative is here when the curve is touching the x-axis, in which case we shall understand the consumer is only having commodity X and no unit of commodity Y. This is also against the assumption of the indifference curve. The indifference curve must have combination of two goods at the same time. Only then the consumer can be indifferent to any combination on the same indifference curve. And indifference curves are convex to the origin. That is easily understood. This property can be easily understood if we have understood the diminishing marginal rate of substitution, then this the property can be very easily understood. As the number of X increases, it cannot increase without reducing the number of Y. So neither MRS is constant nor it will remain, it will continue to increase. That both cannot happen. Now, let me just come to the last unit of this particular session, where I am talking to you about indifference map. Now, indifference map is a collection or a set of indifference curves representing different levels of satisfaction with different combination of two goods A and B. So on the vertical axis, you have the same set of whatever commodity we had earlier, or the lower axis, but each of this curve, C1, IC1, IC2, IC3, or whatever numbers, each of these higher levels of indifference curve indicates to larger quantity of both goods X and Y, and therefore when we present them on a map or on a plane, we call it as an indifference map. Now, the next session I shall introduce to you consumers' equilibrium using the price line and the budget line. So kindly remember to subscribe to this channel and share it with your friends.